Hello and welcome to our second installment of Faith Burritos. So we are going to be jumping in to First John chapter 2. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to be starting with, what are you doing over there? Eating your pen? Seriously?
It's not a pen, it's a highlighter.
Oh, so you're going to be eating your highlighter. So this is how we start the show. You eating highlighters. Interesting. All right, so we're going to be jumping into First John chapter 2, and we're going to be starting with verse 3. And why are we starting with verse 3?
I have no clue.
Yeah, you have no clue. I have a clue. So anyway, I want to give a little history lesson of the Bible and how it was written. So when it was originally written, this is how it was written. There was no spaces between the words, no punctuation, no way to figure out what it actually says. And when they have words, if it actually went to the end, they would continue the word without a space and keep on going until they get to the end. It was their way of saving paper and stuff like that during the time so that they didn't have to buy so much, and they could also just crush down as much as possible into it.
Is that why Donald Trump tweets that way too?
Probably. I have no idea.
Oh.
I'm not going to talk about that. So anyway... when they came down to putting in chapters and verses, this happened in the 1500s. There's a story that's told that the man who actually put in the verses was late and riding on horseback as he's trying to finish up and write the last couple books of the Bible in the New Testament. And so when he got to First John, there are some errors there and he made some mistakes. So with the verses from the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2, so you get to this point where it says,
it's a nice font.
Thank you. It's just basic, Calvary or whatever font it is that originally happens. Yes, I'm positive.
Oh.
So anyway, it says, my dear children. And so he probably looked at that and said, okay, well, this is the start of a new section, but it really wasn't. This was his concluding statement that he was trying to say from chapter 1. And so the true passage that we're going through today, 1 John chapter 2, 3 through 17, is a separate, passage that begins with verse 3. So sometimes mistakes are made. There's nothing sacred about verse and chapter numbers. That happened after the fact. The original writers, like I said, wrote it very interestingly like this. So you have so there were no verses and chapters or anything like that. That was something that came later so that we could all reference the same place. So you didn't say, oh, well, on page 642 of this book, they have just a way that we can all come together and you can just write it out. If you need big print Bibles for people, if you need small print Bibles for people, you can make it work, and we all know what you're talking about. So that's a little history lesson into why we're only doing this section for today. Chapter 2 is a big chapter. If we went through the whole thing, we'll be here for like 3 hours. And we want this to be about 20 to 30 minutes. So let's dive in. Do you want to kick it off? Jason, do you have any thoughts? Yes, you.
I just realized while you were talking about that you shaved your beard.
Yes, I did. My plan was to be Moses for our VBS. We weren't able to do a VBS, so I have to shave because your wife doesn't like me with a beard, or my wife doesn't like me with a beard. Your sister,
wife cares.
Your sister, my wife, doesn't like me with a beard. So,
okay. So I've been going through First John for the last couple weeks and really trying to deep read and write my own either summary or paraphrase of the thoughts that I feel like from reading it he's trying to get across.
Yep.
And in this section here, what I've written to kind of summarize, I guess, the section that we're doing, in order to follow him, being God, of course, we must keep his commandments to love one another. It's the same commandment God has given us from long ago, but it's become much clearer now because Jesus has shown us. Jesus, being the light and the life, shined light on God's true nature. So if we do not love our brothers, we are in the darkness. We haven't come into the light. We also must not be careful to not love the world, because the world and its desires are passing away, but God's disciples, God's servants will live forever. So that's, I feel like, the main point that he's trying to get across here in this section. A couple different things there. And in John's gospel, he talks about that too. Those and in the other gospels too, Jesus is written to say, you are my brothers, my friends, if you keep my commandments.
Exactly.
Which, from an outsider's point of view, may seem kind of, oh yeah, well, you can be my friend if you do exactly what I command you to do. It seems a little bit off. But of course, with our perspective of Jesus being God, makes more sense. And John also writes later on that his commands are not burdensome. They're actually very clear and simple. And he summarized, I'm getting ahead a little bit of where we're at, but in 1 John 3:23, he very succinctly puts what John's view of what that commandment is. He says, and this is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ, and love one another.
Yeah.
That's basically his. So that's not, it's not a burdensome commandment like the whole Torah law or the thing that Moses handed down. It's a different, it's more of a summary of that law. But anyway, keeping his commandments boils down to those two things, according to John. He talks a lot about loving God, but it's mostly, he seems to me to harp most on believe in the Son of God and love one another.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that goes into loving one another, but that's like, it's pretty simple.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, pretty much with this, it's like I see this as a continuation of his attack of Gnosticism and what's going on and what the people are saying. It's like by him saying, the people who believe in this method of Christianity, I should say, what they would do is they're essentially saying, I know him. In verse 4, it's like, whoever says I know him but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. So essentially, these people are saying, I know him, but there's a difference between knowing something in one's head and knowing something in one's heart. And the Gnostics claimed that Jesus existed, and they know who he was, they knew what he taught, what he stood for and everything, and they had all this knowledge, but it was up here in their heads. They treated Jesus like a fact of history, like George Washington was our first president. They kind of understood it, but it didn't transform who they were as people. And Jesus, and knowing Jesus and understanding who he is should be something that changes every fiber of our being. They knew about Jesus, but they didn't truly know Jesus. And, we know about people we're not close to, and this is different. This is talking about having a relationship with Jesus. To have a relationship with him means that we're close to him. We understand how he thinks, how he acts, what he was supposed to do. That's why these 12 guys walked around with him for so long, to learn and understand who Jesus is so that they could be more like him. So, here I think there's a connection between love and obedience that John is trying to make here. When we come to Christ, our attitude has to change. We no longer love sin or brag about sin or plan to sin or remember sin or enjoy sin or be comfortable with sin as we once were. And so we're bringing back to this mini passage that's here, these first couple of verses. When we live for Jesus, we love him, we obey him, and we walk just like he walked. And like last week, we walk in the light and have fellowship with God because he walks in the light as well. So for us to obey him, it's essentially for us to walk in the light as he walks in the light. We're walking in step and having that relationship as the core.
Yeah, definitely. When it talks about having, like the passage we discussed last week, having fellowship with him is a way different from knowing about him, knowing facts about him. And John, is all about that. Hey, I don't know how many. Do you know how many times he says the word love in his gospel or in his letters? Because it's like a billion.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. No.
Yeah, but that's what he's all about. Love, love because he loved us first. Love the Father. The love of the Father is not in you if you hate your brother. Love one another. Love your brothers. All that stuff. It's all about, I was going to say the feeling, but love is not a feeling. We could talk about that for a little bit. Like what is love?
Maybe don't hurt me no more. Sorry. Every time I've asked that question, that's how I answer.
I thought you only listened to Christian music.
I do, but I still know that from, watching SNL back in the day when they'd have that song with the guys popping their heads all the time.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
The definition of love that I've heard that I like the best is, and this is agape love, like God's love, the unconditional love, is giving to another person's real needs. And so if I'm the more I read through the Bible and hear the word love, and if I plug that definition into it, it makes sense a lot to me. And because when he says that this is how consider the love that the Father has given to us, that's the beginning of chapter 3, which we'll get to in a couple weeks, I guess. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God. That's not the verse that I was looking for. God, there's a verse in there. It's in there somewhere. I can Google it. That God loves us, that he gave himself to die for us, to be the propitiation for our sins. So love is all about giving of yourself and giving whatever you have to give to someone else's needs.
Yeah.
So when he talks about, I'm giving you, and this is the old commandment that you've had from the beginning, love one another, love the brothers. If you love your brothers, you're in the light. If you hate your brothers, you're in the darkness. So some of those same pictures that he's had. But that is what love is all about: giving of yourself, giving of your possessions, giving whatever it is you have to give.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're talking about those commandments. Very simple. Believe in the Son of God, love one another, love other people. But when you're talking about how to actually apply that, how do I, wisdom, using godly wisdom, like seeing all of life from God's point of view, seeing your relationships with other people from that person's point of view, being able to have empathy really helps with that love, I think. Jesus, of course, was great at that. It's all, and in the book of Matthew that I studied in college pretty deeply, compassion. He had compassion on this. He had compassion for the crowds. And if you're if you have the practicing empathy to put yourself in that other person's place, then it brings those feelings of, well, you can really think, what would I want or what would I need, if I was in that place? And that kind of helps you love other people, just getting outside of yourself and always thinking of other people first. If I were that person, what would I need? And not even necessarily what would I want, but what would I need? What's my really need? Of course, our biggest needs are spiritual needs, but John also writes about, if I have the world's goods, I need to give those, So we're talking about practically applying stuff like this, loving your brothers.
Yeah.
Get outside yourself. When you see your neighbors, when you see what is their needs, how can I give to that? How can I give myself to that person?
Yeah. And with this passage, with the section of 7 through 11, talking about I'm not writing you a new command, but an old one. It's essentially combining the two together, essentially love God and love others. That's something, love your neighbor as yourself. Those are something that have been passed down for, a very long time. But then you have Jesus in John's Gospel in 13, 34, and 35. You kind of reference it. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. So essentially he's saying this is the command that we were given. This is how we're supposed to act. This is what we're supposed to do. And then he goes into this idea of whoever claims to be in the light but hates brother and sister is still in the darkness. It's if you're commanded to love, you're commanded to love everyone. It's if you can't even love your brother and sister in Christ, if you can't even love the people you're in the light with, how can you love and care for the people who are essentially your enemies and outside of the light? You know, it's like you're supposed to run after them, chase after them, share them the good news about Jesus. How can you actually do that if you can't even be, if you're acting like the rest of the world and you're hating your own brother and sister? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. You know, back to last week in 1 John 1:5 again, this is the message that we have heard from him and declare for you. God is light. In him there's no darkness at all. And he continues and he's like, you know, we all have to be in the light together. If we're all in the light together, we're all unified. We're all moving together. We're all progressing in the same way. It's like, how can we say that we're in the light with other believers if we're finding reasons to hate them and finding reasons to fight them? So I think the point he's trying to make here is that if we neglect the love, we essentially lose everything. We're not walking in the light, we're walking in the darkness. You can do everything flawlessly, you can believe the right things, but if you don't love your brothers and sisters, then it's like as if these two areas just don't exist in your life. And this does happen all the time. How many times do we place like ministry, or we place being right over caring for people around us and loving the people around us? And if we don't do it properly, we need to repent. I think this is kind of what John was talking about when he wrote to the church in Ephesus and pretty much said, you've lost your first love. It's like you do everything properly, but you don't care for each other. You don't love God. You don't love people. You're not following the commands of who God is. It's like God is love. You need to be following that as well.
Yeah. When you mention stuff about people love or get distracted by other things or other priorities, like, you know, I want to be right, or I need to, you know, do this ministry right, or I need to do this job right, or I need to become the best at this. It's that's like, you know, an inward focus on myself. And that's like kind of what he's what John was writing about at the end of this section we're doing, you know, the lusts of the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, you know, is all inward focused on me, what I want, what I think my needs are, when we should have a singular focus on God. And when if you read the book of John, especially, or any of the Gospels, you come away with this, I do anyway, come away with this feeling of, man, the terrible sacrifice that he made, how much he loves me, that he would do, you know, die for me while I'm still a sinner, and all these things that he does for me. And then even beyond that, when John writes about him, how he cleanses us from all unrighteousness, which is a big part of Jesus' work that gets overlooked sometimes. He goes beyond just forgiveness. It actually sanctifies us. Why is he putting so much effort into me? You know, why does he love me that much, that he's going to care that much to work on my life and make me better, you know, with his spirit being in me and working on me? If you're focusing on that, on God, then it's so much easier to get to love other people the way he, you know, the way he says, as opposed to focusing on myself. Trying to fulfill my own desires.
I think that's exactly what we do, though. It's like we love ourselves more than we love others, and that's where we fall into the trap. It's like the main point of what he was talking about in 15, where he's like, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him. And what we end up doing here is asking that question, who or what do we love? Do we love the things of this world, like our fame, our honor, our comfort, our status, our money, all the things that don't last in this world? Or do we love God, the one who goes beyond all time and will bless us for eternity, and, you know, with everything that we can't take from here? It's like, to John, the idea is clear. And again, to what you were talking about, you know, I always thought it's interesting in 16 where it says the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life come not from the Father, but of this world. And if you really think about why those three things, why did he pick those specific three things? And it's like, isn't that exactly what Adam and Eve were tempted with? You know, they thought about how good the fruit would taste and how good it would nourish them. That's the lust of the flesh. You know, they saw how beautiful and desire it was of fruit, And so that's the lust of the eyes. And then they believed that it would make them just like God. And that's the lust of the pride of life. And so these are the three things and the three areas where we get attacked most. Essentially, it always comes back to those three things, those three questions, or those three things that Satan tempted Eve with in the garden are essentially the main three questions that we are struggling with still to this very day. And the questions that we have the hardest time, we fall into temptation easier because of that.
Yeah, I think those three things really like encapsulate all of sin pretty much.
Yeah.
Through one of those three things. And then in 17, the last verse that we're talking about, the world is passing away along with those lusts, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. And so if I am focused on God, if I get to a place in my life where I really appreciate, the poverty of my spiritual condition, how much I need God, and then get to really appreciate what he's done for me, and I'm submitting to his will because of that. And so I get to a place where I'm focused on God and not focused on myself. Then those things like pride, it doesn't matter if I make a fool out of myself. It doesn't matter if people think I'm bad at my job. It doesn't matter. All those things that were important to me are no longer important. I'm focused on God, and then God focuses on loving. He is a God of love. God is love. As First John says. So he focused on loving other people and always giving himself to other people. And so to me, what are you laughing at?
Nothing.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
I'm
then that
thinking
makes it
of
easier
something that I said earlier where I screwed up. So,
all right.
So
it's an interesting study, actually. The parallels between John's gospel and here John's writings and the book of Genesis. He's like almost, I had a Catholic friend of mine who was in seminary years ago kind of show me some of these things about how John is paralleling Genesis and the creation week. And it even ends up in the garden at the end. He calls Mary the woman, and she supposes Jesus for the gardener. And it's like all these just images of like, it is the new beginning. He says, even starts it within the beginning, just like Genesis. And so I think you're right on, like the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. It's the original sin that we've never gotten rid of. It's the same sin we're dealing with together because we're focused on ourselves and not appreciating and focusing on God.
Exactly. So, I mean, realistically, it's like to sum this all up, I kind of see this as saying you can't have love without obedience. And what's the illustration that the Bible always uses for a relationship between us and God? It's a marriage relationship. With us and Jesus, it's like we're married to one another. And, when I married your sister, now I said that properly this time, what did I promise? I promised to love her in sickness and health, and better or worse, richer and poorer, for as long as we both shall live. And to do that successfully, I need to put her needs above my own. I need to place her first. I need to put God first of all, but I also need to put her above my own personal needs and make that relationship something of utmost importance. And when it comes to our relationship with Jesus, it has to be the same thing, that Jesus chose to give us the cross and to die for our sins. And the best way that we can honor him and love him and care for him is to do exactly what this passage says, to keep his commands and live in the light as he is in the light. And so that's really what we need to be doing. We need to be living lives of obedience. Ironically, with what I'm going to be preaching on Sunday, we're going to be going through Exodus 5, and what Moses and the elders of Israel do is the complete opposite of what God said. He pretty much, God said, Moses, Aaron, and the elders are supposed to go to Pharaoh and supposed to just do what I say, and tell him exactly what I told him to say. Tell it that the God of the Hebrews wants you to, go and sacrifice for 3 days. Please let us go. Instead, the elders of Israel don't show up because they're too afraid to do it. So Aaron and Moses have to go alone. And then Moses pretty much goes in and says, hey, the God of Israel wants you to let my people go, and orders it of Pharaoh, and causes all this ripple effect of all these sins that happen, or like natural consequences that happen. Pharaoh was offended that he punished the Israelites and tried to drive a wedge between their leaders and the people. And he was successful in doing it because they just didn't obey what God said. If they were able to go and it was a committed front who loved God and trusted God and went together, those elders went, he would have saw this group who was bound together. Instead, he found two guys who that he assumed was just being troublemakers. And then if they actually asked politely, like they were supposed to, it would have caused them not to be, punished in the way. He'd probably just be like, just go back to work. I say no, you can't go. Exactly what God said. But because they chose not to listen to God and didn't obey him, there's these natural consequences that, hurt them in the next couple weeks that they have to deal with trying to get their own straw and hay and everything like that. So it's just important for us to remember that we need to be obedient, that obedience matters to God, that he truly does care about it. And, our love for him is tied into our obedience because that's how we build a stronger relationship.
Yeah. You can't have, like you said earlier, you can't have love of God without obedience to his command. And then his commands is to love. His command is to love. So they both go right hand in hand. Obedience means nothing if you're trying to obey, but you don't have love, like 1 Corinthians 13 and other places. And then you can't actually obey him without, or you can't love him without obeying also his commands. It's
exactly.
two
They
sides
go
of the same
hand in
coin.
hand. Yeah, they go hand in hand, that you need one with the other.
Well, Tim, I love you.
Oh, I love you too. Nice little creepy thing that just happened there.
And we have the same phone. We just realized that today too. How about that? We're like twins separated at birth.
Yes. This episode is brought to you by the LG Stylio 5.
You ever use the stylus?
Yes, I have.
I didn't think I would like it, but I love it.
Yeah. At first
Anyway.
I didn't, but I found some cool features that you could do with this that we could talk about afterwards.
Yeah, all right.
But anyway, unfortunately for today, you only get half a burrito because we're going to finish up chapter 2 next time. So we'll give you the rest of the burrito of 1 John chapter 2.
The cheese and the sour cream are for next week. You only get the meat to this week.
Yeah. And we'll give you a side of guac too.